Hello there, my sleepy fellows. Come in, settle down, and make yourself cozy by the fire. Tonight, I invite you to journey with me into the quiet, golden heart of Middle-earth, where soft winds rustle through hedges and stars glimmer gently above the rolling hills of the Shire. The world beyond your window may still hum with activity, but here, time moves differently, slower, softer, more like a whisper than a sound. Can you hear it? The distant chime of wind bells on a hobbit's porch, the gentle rustling of leaves in the twilight breeze, the rhythmic puff of a kettle boiling just right. The sun has just dipped behind the hills, leaving a warm amber glow across the land. Smoke curls lazily from round hobbit chimneys, and the smell of freshly baked seed cakes drifts along the winding paths. It's a moment made for wonder, and perhaps for a story, for tonight we'll follow a curious hobbit, one who finds a mysterious old map tucked away in a dusty drawer, a map that whispers of paths forgotten, and a kingdom thought long lost. So lie back, close your eyes, and let the magic of Middle-earth carry you gently onward. The tale is just beginning. Now that we've made ourselves comfortable beneath the soft twilight sky of the Shire, let me share a little more about the tale we're about to explore together. Tonight, our story winds gently around a most unexpected hobbit, not one of great fame or daring deeds, but one of quiet habits and gentle heart, a hobbit whose life was filled with teacups, second breakfasts, and long, thoughtful walks past flowering hedgerows. Yet, as the old saying goes, even the smallest voice may carry the secrets of great things. It begins with something simple, an old wooden drawer tucked beneath a writing desk, a place for loose buttons, brittle parchment, and forgotten ink pots. But among these dusty bits and pieces, our hobbit finds something strange, something old, a folded map, yellowed by time and etched with markings no one in the Shire remembers. Mountains drawn with careful hands, rivers named in languages nearly lost, and at the very edge of it all, a faded crown. Could it be? A clue to the lost kingdom spoken of only in song and bedtime lore? Our story tonight unfolds like a map itself, layer by layer, step by step. You'll walk alongside our hobbit through misty fields and ancient glens, listen to tales whispered under moonlight, and discover that sometimes the quietest hearts carry the loudest dreams. If you find warmth in these tales of gentle wonder and peaceful magic, feel free to follow along by subscribing to our storytelling journey. And if you'd like to drift through even more stories like this one, there are many other sleepy paths waiting for you here. But for now, dear friend, just breathe deeply, let go of the day behind you, and prepare to follow the soft trails of starlight and song. For a kingdom long lost awaits beyond the mist, and the map has already begun to unfold. Our story begins not with a roar, but with a whisper. In the heart of the Shire, nestled between golden barley fields and winding mossy lanes, there lived a hobbit named Tilden Underbank. Not many outside his village knew of him, and even within the borders of Bywater, he was mostly regarded as that quiet one who keeps to himself. But those who truly observed, those who looked past the calm smile and gentle nods, might have noticed a certain glimmer in his eye, like the reflection of far-off stars not yet explored. Tilden was not a hero by any tale spinner's measure. He didn't climb mountains or chase dragons, nor did he boast loudly over pints at the Green Dragon Inn. Instead, his days were filled with quiet rituals, early morning walks before the dew had lifted, long afternoons spent beneath the old oak tree, with books older than the hills, and evenings by his fireplace, sipping honeyed tea with a notebook open on his lap. His cottage was a small, ivy-draped dwelling with round windows that caught the sunset just right, filling every room with amber glow. Shelves lined the walls, each one stacked not only with books, but with curious odds and ends. Dried herbs, strange feathers, and bits of parchment covered in scribbles. One could easily miss the subtle pattern among these things, each pointing to stories older than even the oldest hobbits dared remember. Tilden had always been fascinated by maps, not just the kind that led to neighboring villages or berry-picking spots, but ancient maps, the ones half-finished, with edges torn and roads that faded into question marks. He collected them like puzzle pieces, hoping that someday one might speak to him, whisper to him, even. And one quiet afternoon, that moment finally came. While searching through the bottom drawer of his writing desk, looking, as it happened, for a quill he'd misplaced, Tilden's fingers brushed something smooth and cool. Pulling it free, he found a rolled map bound by a silver thread. The parchment smelled of old ink and lavender, and when he gently unrolled it, he found not only the familiar mountains and rivers of Middle-earth, but symbols he'd never seen. A crown, faded into the corner, a small rune near the edge, and a line barely visible leading somewhere west. That night, as fireflies danced beyond the window pane, and the wind carried the sweet scent of clover through the open sill, Tilden stared at the map long into the night. Something in his heart stirred, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear nor excitement, but something older than both, a whisper calling him home to a places he'd never been. And so, the journey began, with a map, a murmur, and a hobbit whose courage was yet to be awakened. The days in the Shire moved like slow clouds in a spring sky, unhurried, soft, and steady. For Tilden Underbank, each morning was a quiet return to rhythm. He awoke just as the first pale light peeked through his round bedroom window, warming the wooden floors of his hobbit hole with a drowsy golden glow. His feet found their way into warm slippers by memory, and soon he was in the kitchen, humming to himself while boiling water for tea. The cottage filled with the scent of steeping mint and fresh bread. Outside, birds chirped faintly in the hedgerows. It was a gentle world he lived in, calm, nourishing, and layered in details often missed by those who walked too quickly. Tilden, however, never hurried. He spent long moments listening to the wind as it moved through the trees, noticing how different it sounded after rain or just before a storm. Most mornings, he'd walk the lane that wound behind his home, weaving through old trees and flowering bushes. He'd pause often, kneeling to inspect a strange mushroom smiling at a robin perched nearby, or gazing at the soft ripples of the distant river. Each path had a memory, each stone a story. And while most hobbits took these walks for the sake of fresh air or idle musing, Tilden walked as if listening for something. It was during these walks that the first threads of mystery began to wind their way into his days. One morning, not long after discovering the silver-threaded map, Tilden noticed a faint hum as he approached a bend in the forest path. It wasn't a sound exactly, not like birdsong or breeze, but more like a low vibration in the earth beneath his feet. He paused, tilting his head. The leaves on the trees remained still, and the world was silent. But the hum lingered, pulsing just beneath his senses. He glanced around. To his left, nestled in the roots of a twisted oak, was a patch of wildflowers. Delicate, white-petaled, and gently swaying, though no wind stirred, he crouched beside them, brushing his fingers over the petals. As he did, the hum grew faintly louder, not in his ears, but in his chest, like the soft strum of a harp string within his bones. The feeling faded as he stepped back, and the forest returned to normal. He stood there for a long while, one hand on the old tree trunk, breathing deeply. The scent of moss and earth filled his senses. He said nothing. He simply nodded to the flowers, as though acknowledging their secret, and walked on. Later that day, in the quiet sanctuary of his cottage, he returned to the map. He spread it across his table and studied it in the flickering candlelight. The lines on the parchment shimmered faintly, as if they had been drawn with ink from the moon itself. He hadn't noticed before, but one of the tiny symbols near the western edge, an ancient crown, seemed clearer now, its curves more distinct. He reached for a magnifying glass and leaned in close. Around the crown, a ring of tiny elvish script encircled it, barely legible, like something meant only for those who looked closely enough. He traced the edge with his finger and felt the same gentle hum rise beneath his skin. It was subtle, like a memory from long ago. Over the next few days, the threads of mystery grew no louder, but they wove themselves into his routines with quiet persistence. As Tilden chopped vegetables for stew, he found himself humming an unfamiliar tune. When he dusted the books on his shelves, one fell open on its own to a page about ancient kingdoms lost beneath the mountains. And when he lit his lantern at dusk, the flame would flicker once in blue before settling to gold. All of it was soft, none of it alarming, but all of it pointed to something, a pattern forming beneath the surface. Even the weather seemed to play its part. The wind often came now from the west, carrying with it a scent he couldn't quite place. It reminded him of old parchment and wildflower meadows, of cave stone and the cool breath of night. Sometimes it brought with it the faintest sound, like a far-off bell or the rustle of banners in a long-forgotten hall. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned lavender, Tilden sat beneath his favorite tree. The map lay open beside him, weighed down at the corners by smooth stones. He didn't study it tonight. He simply watched the stars as they blinked to life overhead. A gentle tug stirred in his chest, not urgency, but invitation. The stars, the flowers, the wind, the map, all of it whispered the same quiet thing. There is more. Not danger, not adventure in the grand, perilous sense, but mystery, a tale left unfinished, a place where history still waited to be found. He thought of the lost kingdom spoken of in whispers, an old dwarven realm once said to have vanished beneath the hills, where gold shone beneath crystal ceilings, and songs echoed through stone corridors. A place where maps like his were once carved onto walls. Could it be? He didn't know, and that, in truth, was the beginning of it all. That night, he placed the map carefully inside a leather satchel just beside his favorite pipe and a small bound notebook. He didn't yet pack a full bag. No, he wasn't ready. But placing the map there, it felt like a step. Outside, the stars shimmered like silver lanterns on black velvet. The Shire was silent, wrapped in warmth and shadow, and in the stillness, the mystery stirred once more, like the first breeze before a journey, or the hush before an old tale is told. Sleep now, my sleepy fellows. The road lies ahead, but for now, let the quiet hum of the Shire hold you close, and let dreams wrap gently around your thoughts like soft wool near the hearth. There is time yet, and many gentle paths to follow. The days that followed were wrapped in a dreamlike rhythm. The air grew a little cooler, as though autumn had whispered ahead of its season. The sunlight filtering through the trees turned golden and thick, and the breeze that passed over the Shire's hills carried a strange fragrance, like wild thyme mixed with old parchment and the scent of faraway places. Tilden Underbank moved through these days with the same quiet grace he always had, yet something inside him had begun to shift, like a leaf trembling on a branch before its fall. He no longer walked with the same absent-minded meandering. His steps had purpose now, though soft, and his eyes often lingered on shadows that hadn't caught his attention before. It was during one of these afternoon walks, deep in the forest glade behind his cottage, that something new made itself known. There was a fork in the trail, a place he had passed countless times, but this afternoon, a faint shimmer crossed the air to his left. It wasn't light exactly, but more like the glint of memory. It hovered in the corner of his vision, vanishing each time he looked directly at it. But the moment he stepped closer, the world grew oddly quiet. Birdsong ceased. Leaves stilled mid-sway. Even the insects seemed to pause their busy work. He followed the shimmer. The path turned narrow, winding through hawthorn and elder trees. The scent of crushed moss rose beneath his feet, and as he walked, the sunlight dimmed, replaced by a soft glow that had no source. It wasn't the light of the sun, nor of any lantern, but the forest itself, as though the leaves remembered starlight from an age long past and were sharing it now with him. At the heart of this hidden glade, a stone rested, smooth and ancient, worn by time and moss. Etched upon its surface was a single mark, the same crown symbol that adorned his mysterious map. Tilden stepped forward, breath held, as if not to wake a sleeping memory. The moment he touched the stone, the world seemed to exhale, and then came the hum. It started in his feet, rising like a warm pulse through his chest, then spread outward through the forest. The trees shivered, not from wind, but from recognition. Tiny sparks floated into the air like silver dandelion seeds, drifting around him before vanishing. The stone pulsed once beneath his fingers, as if responding to his presence. He pulled his hand back slowly, heart calm yet stirred. The mark on the stone remained unchanged, but the moment had imprinted itself within him like ink pressed into paper. He walked home under a deepening sky, the path familiar yet transformed. That evening, by the soft light of his hearth, he unfolded the map once more. The lines shimmered faintly in the firelight, and though they remained the same, Tilden noticed something he hadn't before: tiny dots near the crown mark, arranged like a constellation, a trail perhaps, or a key. He ran his fingers across the paper, and for the first time, it felt warm to the touch. That night, dreams came. He dreamed of halls carved from stone, vast and echoing, lit by soft blue lanterns suspended from unseen ceilings. He walked alone through those halls, the map in his hand, while the walls hummed with forgotten songs. In one chamber, a staff rested atop a stone dais, its wood dark and smooth, its tip crowned with crystal. It pulsed with gentle light, as though breathing, and behind it all, a voice, soft, melodic, and ancient, spoke in a tongue he did not know, yet somehow understood. The path remembers, the map listens. He awoke before dawn, the dream's warmth still clinging to him like mist. Over the next few days, more small moments unfurled like petals. Once, as he stood by the river's edge, he saw a shape just beneath the water, a swirl of light that danced across the current, then vanished. Another time, a group of fireflies circled him in perfect silence, forming a spiral pattern before disappearing into the dusk. One morning, a raven landed on his windowsill, its feathers glossy, its gaze intelligent. It tilted its head at him and croaked once before flying off, leaving behind a single silver-threaded feather that shimmered like moonlight. Tilden tucked it into the folds of his map, heart beating softly in wonder. Each of these encounters seemed to deepen the mystery without rushing it. There was no sudden call to arms, no thundering danger, just a gentle accumulation of signs, like the slow ringing of an invisible bell, reminding him that the world was wider, deeper, and more alive than he had ever known. Then came the lantern lights. One evening, as he followed the old trail again, past the glade with the etched stone, he saw them, small orbs of soft blue light, floating just above the ground, weaving through the trees in a slow, deliberate pattern. They didn't flicker like fireflies. They glided, silent and sure. Tilden followed. The path wound deeper into the forest than he'd ever gone, but fear never touched him. The air was cool and clean, the earth soft beneath his feet. He walked with his hands tucked gently behind his back, as if strolling through a memory rather than a place. The lights led him to a clearing where an ancient tree stood, a tree unlike any he'd seen before. Its bark shimmered like silvered ash, and its leaves were pale and luminous. Beneath it, sat a figure cloaked in gray-green robes, their face hidden in shadow. Tilden paused at the edge of the clearing, unsure whether to step forward. The figure looked up. Their eyes gleamed like polished amber, old eyes, kind and deep. They made no sound, but raised a hand in greeting. Tilden nodded in return, then stepped into the light. The air felt different here, heavy with presence. The stranger reached into their cloak and produced a small object, a stone disc etched with the same crown mark. They placed it on the ground between them, then gestured to Tilden's satchel. He drew out the map slowly, spreading it beside the disc. The symbols aligned perfectly. The stranger said just one word, softly spoken but echoing with depth: "Remember." And then, like mist at morning's edge, they vanished, leaving behind only the crown-marked disc and the fading shimmer of lantern light. Tilden sat in the clearing until long after the stars rose. He wasn't sure what he had encountered: a spirit, a guardian, a memory made real. But he knew, with the quiet certainty of water flowing downstream, that the path had begun. The journey would not be grand in the way of warriors and battles. It would be soft, patient, and wondrous, and it would begin with him, Tilden Underbank, quiet hobbit of the Shire, and bearer of a map that whispered of the lost kingdom. Now, my sleepy fellows, rest your eyes. Let the soft sounds of the forest linger in your thoughts. Let the shimmer of lantern lights drift gently into your dreams. For the path is long and winding, but tonight all is calm. We shall walk further next time. The morning after his strange encounter with the robed figure beneath the silver tree, Tilden Underbank awoke in a silence that felt different than usual. It wasn't the familiar, comforting quiet of the Shire. Rather, it was the kind of stillness that comes before something is about to change. He sat by his window, sipping tea as golden light spilled across the fields. His eyes kept drifting to the satchel where he had tucked away the stone disc, the one with the etched crown. It hadn't left his thoughts all night. After breakfast, he took the map and the disc into his study, spreading them across the table. The morning light illuminated both, and once again, Tilden noticed how the markings on the disc aligned perfectly with the pattern hidden in the folds of the map. They weren't merely symbols anymore, they were directions, markers in a language older than the Shire itself. He reached for a magnifying lens and held it above a corner of the map that had always seemed oddly textured. As the lens focused, fine lines emerged, so faint they seemed to shimmer in and out of existence. Beneath the crown symbol, there were faint traces of a road, or perhaps a path, winding its way toward a symbol he hadn't noticed before. It looked like a mountain, but split down the middle with a single beam of light emerging from within. His heart stirred gently, like the breeze that passed through the ivy on his cottage walls. "I suppose," he murmured to no one in particular, "we should see where this leads." And so he packed lightly: a flask of water, a wrapped parcel of seed cake, a small lantern, and of course the map and the disc. He stepped out into the early afternoon, the sky soft with pale clouds and the scent of wildflowers drifting on the breeze. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but his feet seemed to. They led him westward, through a part of the Shire he rarely visited, over gentle hills and through lightly wooded trails, until the trees began to grow closer together and the earth beneath them turned cool and shadowed. It was nearing dusk when he came upon a hollow between two hills, half shrouded in mist. At the far end of the hollow stood an old stone archway, worn by wind and covered in moss. It looked like part of a forgotten ruin, except that above the keystone, etched into the weathered stone, was a shape that made Tilden pause. The mountain symbol. His breath caught softly. He walked slowly toward it, each step cushioned by moss and fallen leaves. The air here felt thick, as though time had slowed. The arch led to a short, descending tunnel, narrow but not threatening. He lit his lantern and stepped inside. The walls were smooth and cold, carved with more of the same markings: crowns, stars, a winding road. They pulsed faintly in the lantern light, as though awakened by his presence. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, and there, resting atop a stone pedestal, was something unexpected: a cylindrical case, no longer than his arm, bound in silver bands and sealed with wax that shimmered like starlight. The seal bore the same crown mark. He approached it with reverence, fingertips hovering before he finally reached out and broke the seal. The wax snapped with a soft crack, and the case opened with a low sigh, as if it had been holding its breath for centuries. Inside was a scroll, aged but perfectly preserved. He unrolled it slowly, careful not to tear the delicate parchment. It was another map. This one, however, was unlike any he had seen. It wasn't a map of the Shire or even the lands of men and elves. It showed a deep mountain range, carved in sweeping curves. At its heart stood a great city, its towers like spears of stone, its gates flanked by mighty pillars. Above the city, a single name had been written in Elvish script: Khazad Dûm. His heart beat softly, but quickly. He'd heard the name only in whispers from wandering scholars and half-remembered tales. Dwarodelf, the great dwarven kingdom beneath the misty mountains, lost to shadow and silence long ago. Tilden traced the route shown on the map with his fingertip. It led from the Shire, through the woods, across the Barrenduin River, and into the highlands west of the mountains. A hidden trail, one not marked on any known map. Why had this been hidden? Why was he the one to find it? He sat on the floor of the chamber for some time, the scroll in his lap and his lantern casting long shadows on the walls. He felt no fear, only a deep, stirring calm, like the hush before the first snowfall or the sound of a distant melody returning to memory. There was a connection here between this map and the one he had found tucked away in his uncle's attic years ago. He now suspected the old Hobbit had known more than he ever let on. Perhaps he, too, had followed this same path. Perhaps he had found the hidden kingdom and chosen not to speak of it. The chamber remained quiet, the lantern flame steady. As Tilden prepared to leave, he placed the second map carefully within his satchel. But before he turned to go, he noticed something else behind the pedestal, partially hidden beneath a stone shelf. It was a staff, carved from dark ashwood. It bore simple markings, runes of old, faint and smooth from time. At its top, nestled in a silver clasp, was a crystal the size of a plum, cloudy with swirls of light within. He did not dare touch it. Instead, he bowed gently and left it where it rested. Somehow, he knew this place had not been meant as a destination, but as a guidepost. A whisper, a quiet voice saying, "You're on the right path." He returned through the tunnel and out into the deepening twilight. The mist had lifted, and stars blinked into view overhead. The forest no longer felt distant or strange. It felt familiar, as though it had always been waiting. As he walked back toward the Shire, the scroll safely tucked away, he thought of all that lay ahead, not with urgency or worry, but with the soft excitement of one who has glimpsed a greater truth and knows, at last, that they are part of something much older, much vaster, and far more beautiful than they had ever imagined. The stars whispered above, the road stretched on, and the secrets of the map, of Khazad-dûm, of the lost kingdom, of the path still to come, waited, quietly patient, beneath stone and time. The walk home through the forest felt different now. Tilden Underbank, his satchel resting against his side, moved slowly along the faint trail, the canopy above tinged silver by the starlight slipping through. His lantern had long been extinguished. He no longer needed its flame. The world around him glowed softly, almost as if it too were breathing in the wonder of what had just been discovered. Behind him, nestled in the hollow, lay the hidden chamber and its ancient scroll. But within him, something far older had stirred. He didn't speak aloud. There were no exclamations or rushed footsteps, only quiet, thoughtful steps through dew-laced grass. His thoughts flowed gently, like the Baranduin River in springtime. By the time he reached the rise overlooking his cottage, the sky had begun to pale toward dawn. He sat on the mossy stone bench beside his garden gate, the coolness of the morning air brushing against his cheeks. In the hush of those early hours, Tilden opened his satchel and drew out the scroll again. Even now, under the soft light of the coming sun, the ink on the parchment shimmered faintly. The mountains drawn in sweeping, confident strokes. The old dwarven markings that curled around the name Khazad-dûm, a line that wound through forgotten lands, marked with stars and symbols he did not yet understand. He ran a finger over the path, not to memorize it, but to feel it, the way a hobbit might trace the carvings on his grandmother's knitting chest. Familiar, even if never seen before, his thoughts wandered to his uncle, the quiet, sharp-eyed hobbit who had loved books about distant realms more than market-day chatter. Tilden remembered now how his uncle used to disappear for a few days at a time, returning with muddy boots and a faraway look in his eye. No one ever asked where he'd been. Maybe no one really wanted to know. And now here he sat, with pieces of that hidden story laid in his lap. His hands were the same size as his uncle's. Perhaps his heart had always carried the same longing, too. Tilden stood and walked to the little hill behind his garden, the one where the view stretched all the way to the western hills. He sat on the grass, the scroll across his knees, and let his eyes drift across the horizon. The land seemed to sleep in peace, But beneath that peace, he sensed something ancient, a presence or a memory, gently rising through the morning mists. He spoke quietly, his voice barely louder than a breeze. "I don't think it's just a map to a place," he said. "It's a map to a time that still echoes through the stones and rivers, even if no one remembers." The wind stirred his curls gently, like an unseen hand brushing away a thought that had lingered too long. He didn't feel like a hero or an adventurer or anything grand. He was still just Tilden Underbank, lover of seed cakes and softly turning pages, of warm fires and old blankets. But something in him had changed. The road had changed him, not in a loud, brash way, but in the way the soil changes slowly beneath a tree, deepening over the years until its roots find springs long hidden. Tilden leaned back onto the mossy ground and looked up at the brightening sky. Birds had begun their morning chorus, but even their song felt different, as if they too were singing to something long unseen. He thought of the disk and its crown, of the markings in the chamber, of the soft glimmering staff he'd left behind, not because he didn't want it, but because he knew, somehow, it belonged to the past. He was not here to take from that place. He was here to remember, to carry something forward. His fingers brushed over the map once more, and he found his thoughts drifting, not forward, but backward, to the stories whispered when he was small. Stories of dwarves who delved too deep, of elves who sang beneath starlight, of kings and kingdoms swallowed by time. He had always thought they were just tales. Now, he wasn't so sure. He understood now that magic in Middle-earth was not always in the flash of fire or the clash of blades. Sometimes it was in the hush of forgotten paths, in the warmth of a crystal held in darkness, in the sudden knowing that the world was deeper and older than he'd ever dared to believe. The scroll, the path, the chamber, they were not invitations to conquest or glory. They were whispers, soft threads in a tapestry far greater than himself, a gentle reminder that some things should not be lost, not to memory, nor to silence. Tilden folded the scroll slowly and tucked it back into the satchel, wrapping it with a soft cloth. Not to hide it, but to protect it. It was not ready to be shared, not yet. There was still more to learn. The journey, he knew now, would not be one of rushing forward. It would be one of listening to the land, to old stories, to the stars. He returned to his cottage as the sun peeked over the trees. He lit a small fire, warmed a cup of tea, and placed the satchel beside him like a dear friend. The world outside was waking up. Somewhere, farmers were heading to the fields, and children were chasing each other along stone paths. The Shire rolled on in its gentle way. But for Tilden, something quiet and powerful had shifted. He was no longer just a hobbit who loved quiet evenings. He was a bearer of memory, and in time, perhaps, he would be a guide. For now, he simply sat in the morning light, hands wrapped around his tea, heart wrapped around a mystery, and mind drifting like a leaf upon the slow, deep current of Middle-earth. The map waited, but there was no hurry. In this moment, there was only warmth and wonder and the quiet joy of knowing he was part of something beautiful, something forgotten, something beginning again. Sleep well now, sleepy fellows. Let your dreams drift with the hush of ancient scrolls and the rustle of old maps as Tilden gazes westward beneath the early sun, heart full of quiet wonder and footsteps yet to come. The next morning came slowly. Tilden Underbank, satchel carefully packed and heart wrapped in a quiet determination, stepped out from his garden gate beneath a pale sky. The morning was crisp, touched with a faint breeze that carried the scent of honeysuckle and moss. He took a long breath, steadying, not bracing. He was not setting off with clanging armor or rations on his back, but with the softer things, stories, wonder, and a sense of something just out of reach. He followed the old forest path that ran along the western hills. It was not on any map, at least not one a cartographer would keep. This path lived in footnotes, in tales told over mugs of cider, and in the footprints of wandering folk. And it was on this winding, leaf-dappled road that Tilden met his first companion. It was just past midday, the sun filtering through tall beeches, when he saw her, a slender figure in a moss-colored cloak, kneeling beside a small brook. Her hair was long and pale, not white, but starlight silver, and it shimmered like water in motion. She dipped her fingers into the stream, whispering softly in a tongue older than the hills. Tilden didn't speak. He only stepped forward gently, the crunch of leaf beneath his boot, the soft announcement of his presence. The elf looked up, not startled, but curious. Her eyes were deep gray, like twilight before rain. "You walk softly, Hobbit," she said, her voice calm and musical. "I suppose I do," Tilden replied, bowing slightly. "Though not softly enough, it seems." She smiled, and for a moment they shared the kind of silence that feels like it's been waiting to happen. "I am called Nenya," she said, "and you carry something that does not belong only to you." Tilden touched his satchel instinctively. "The map?" "The memory," she answered. "But yes, the map too." They sat together on a flat stone by the stream, the sound of the water weaving between their words. Tilden shared what he had found, not in urgency or boast, but as one might share a dream, softly and with wonder still clinging to the edges. Nenya listened without interruption. When he finished, she looked up at the sun breaking through the canopy. "You are not the first hobbit to walk this path," she said. "Long ago, one of your kind passed through these woods, humming old tunes and asking quiet questions. I guided him too." Tilden's eyes widened. Was his name Brelin? My uncle? She nodded slowly. He was gentle-hearted, much like you, but where he stopped, you continue. She reached into a pouch at her side and drew out a small stone, flat, smooth, and marked with a single rune etched in silver. "This will help," she said, "but only if you listen, truly listen." Tilden turned the stone in his hand, the rune shimmering in the light. It felt warm, familiar. Nenya rose with grace and looked down the path. "Keep west," she said. "You'll find another who waits." "Who?" Tilden asked, standing as well, but she was already walking away, her cloak catching the wind like a banner of leaves. Tilden stared after her for a moment, then slipped the stone into his pocket and continued down the path. The second encounter came at twilight. He had walked for hours beneath towering trees where the light grew thinner and the air cooler. As the path bent toward a rocky ledge, he saw a figure sitting near a fire, the flames dancing low beneath a hanging kettle. The man was broad-shouldered, wrapped in a deep green cloak, his face mostly hidden beneath the shadows of a hood. But when Tilden drew closer, the man looked up, revealing wise eyes touched with weariness. "A traveler from the Shire," the man said. "Not something I see often." Tilden nodded. "Not something I've often done." The man gestured to the fire. "Come then, it's a night for stories." Tilden sat gratefully, warming his hands by the gentle flames. The man handed him a tin cup filled with warm herb tea, scented with mint and something ancient. "I am Haller," the man said, pulling back his hood. His face was lined but steady, his hair streaked with gray and bound with a leather tie. "A ranger?" Tilden asked. "A keeper of memory," Haller answered, "and it seems you've found something worth keeping." They spoke into the evening, their voices low, blending with the crackle of the fire and the hoot of distant owls. Haller knew of the lost kingdom. He spoke of it not as a myth, but as a quiet truth buried beneath stone and story. "There were 3 keys," he said, 3 guides left behind. One was light, one was word, one was echo. And I have the map," Tilden whispered. "Then perhaps you carry the first key," Haller murmured, "or perhaps the path is the key, and you are merely the door." Tilden sipped his tea slowly, the warmth settling into his chest. When the fire burned low and the stars shone bright overhead, Haller handed him a small bundle wrapped in leather. "Take this," he said. "It belonged to one who walked before you. It may be of help." Tilden unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tiny lens of clear crystal, bound in silver. He held it up to the firelight, and the flame bent and twisted in strange ways, revealing a second flickering flame hidden within. "It sees what eyes cannot," Haller said, "but only when the heart is quiet." Tilden thanked him softly. He slept beneath the stars that night, nestled in a bed of moss and dreams, the map tucked beneath his head and the crystal held close. By morning, Haller was gone. Only a circle of stones remained where the fire had been. Tilden rose slowly, feeling not weary, but steadied, as if he were now part of a rhythm older than himself. The path stretched on, quiet and welcoming, and so he walked. Each step forward carried not just feet, but stories. He was no longer walking alone, not truly. He was surrounded by the quiet echoes of those who came before and those who perhaps would follow after. And the map in his satchel no longer felt like a puzzle. It felt like a promise. "Sleep well now, sleepy fellows. Let your dreams be filled with quiet paths, silver-eyed wanderers, and fireside whispers beneath the stars. There are still stories waiting, gently unfolding along the road ahead." The forest opened up into a clearing just as the last light of the sun dipped below the western hills. Tilden Underbank stepped quietly into the hollow, his footsteps softened by pine needles and moss. It had been a long day of walking, quiet, thoughtful walking, no rushing, just the rhythmic sound of his boots pressing into the earth and the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by evening winds. He set his pack down and looked up. Above him stretched a velvet sky, the stars already beginning to show their silver faces. They twinkled gently, as if winking from some far place older than memory. A soft sigh escaped his lips. He was grateful for this moment, for the hush and stillness that wrapped itself around him like a woolen shawl. Soon, a soft voice called out from the trees. "I thought I'd find you here." It was Nenya, the silver-haired elf he had met earlier. She stepped into the clearing without a sound, her cloak drifting like mist behind her. With her came Haller, the ranger with the deep voice and deep eyes. They had not planned to meet again, not in words, but the road has its own ways. "I brought something," Haller said, holding up a small bundle of firewood. Tilden smiled. "And I brought marsh berries." A fire was made, not large, but enough. Enough for warmth, for tea, for the telling of things that only starlight should hear. They sat in a quiet circle, 3 figures from different corners of Middle-earth, bound now by something more ancient than friendship. Tilden stirred the fire gently. Sparks leapt up, dancing toward the sky. "Will you tell a tale?" he asked softly. Nenya looked into the flames. "I will." She reached into a pouch and drew out a small stone, smooth and pale, like moonlight made solid. She held it up. "This is an elf stone," she said, passed from voice to voice. "It is only given when the story it carries is ready to be told again." Tilden leaned closer. "Long ago," she began, "before your grandfather's grandfathers were born, there was a great tree called Silmatha. It stood in a valley now forgotten, its roots older than the mountain bones, its branches wide enough to hold starlight itself." She spoke slowly, as if each word was stitched with memory. "It is said that Silmatha sang, not with voice, but with breath. The wind through its leaves made melodies that calmed beasts and stirred sleeping rivers. Even the birds listened, and the moonlight lingered longer in its branches." Tilden listened, his eyes wide. The fire crackled softly, as though responding. "One day," she continued, "a dwarf wandered into the valley, lost and weary. His name was Dorner. He was clever, but proud. He had never heard the music of the tree, for it was not meant for those who rushed." She paused, but that night, Dornar sat beneath Silmatha and wept. Not from sadness, but from being forgotten by his kin, and so the tree sang for him. She turned to Tilden. It sang of memories buried deep, of lost roads and hidden halls, of a kingdom once proud, and now scattered like leaves in autumn wind. Tilden's heart thudded gently in his chest. "That kingdom," she whispered, "was not far from where we sit." Haller cleared his throat softly. "And that brings me to my tale." He reached for a stick and began drawing simple shapes in the dirt beside the fire, mountains, rivers, and a small rune-marked circle. "This," he said, "is a symbol once found on old blades and helmets. It belonged to the kingdom of Tharbad Dûm, a stronghold older than the Shire, built beneath the earth but touched by starlight. Tilden leaned in. Legend says that Tharbad Dûm was ruled by a council, not of kings, but of keepers. They were chosen not by bloodline, but by dream. The staff of each keeper bore a carved map, a different one, and together they formed the full path to the heart of the kingdom. He drew 3 intersecting lines on the earth. 3 maps, he said. 3 doors, Tilden whispered, and I have one. Nenya smiled softly. You do. There was a long pause, the kind that felt not empty, but full of listening. Haller leaned back, eyes turned to the stars. You see, he murmured, we are not just remembering the past. We are listening to it. The land remembers, Tilden, every path, every sorrow, every whisper. Tilden sat in silence, the warmth of the fire brushing against his cheeks. He looked at the stars. They seemed brighter now, no longer distant but familiar. He took the map from his satchel and laid it on the moss beside them. It shimmered faintly in the firelight, the runes glowing just slightly. Nenya reached out a hand. There is one more story, she said, and it is yours to tell, Tilden Underbank. You will write it not with ink, but with your feet, your heart, and your listening. Tilden swallowed gently. I don't know how, he whispered. Haller smiled. Then you are ready. They said little after that, just sat in stillness, watching the fire fade into coals. The wind was kind, the stars were gentle. Eventually, Nenya rose and disappeared into the trees, silent as a sigh. Haller followed not long after, his cloak vanishing into shadow. Tilden remained. He lay back on the moss and watched the sky shift above him, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he heard something, not a voice exactly, not music either, a hum, a thread, a story, just beginning to be told. And with that, he closed his eyes. Let the map wait till morning. Tonight there were stars enough to guide him. Sleep deeply, sleepy fellows. Let the old stories drift through your dreams like gentle winds through ancient trees. You are safe, you are home, and the road still lies ahead, quiet and waiting. As the stars wheeled above and the ancient wind whispered through the tall grass, the final stretch of the journey began to unfold. Our dear Hobbit, now far from the quiet gardens of the Shire, found himself standing before a ridge draped in fog. Behind him trailed the faint footprints of the path he had walked, a winding trail of firelit stories, starlit glades, and timeless friendships. Before him, however, lay the final turning point, the place the map had gently guided him toward all along. He held the parchment in his small, weather-worn hands, the corners curling ever so slightly with time. The map had once seemed ordinary, just another heirloom tucked away in a dusty drawer. But now its symbols breathed with meaning. The ink, once faded, shimmered faintly in the moonlight, as though some unseen hand had only just written it, the past and present softly entwining. With quiet steps, he approached a series of stone pillars carved into the cliffside, each inscribed with ancient dwarvish runes. Moss crept around their edges, and vines danced in the breeze, but the script still sang in silence. He placed his hand upon one, feeling a low thrum of memory within the stone, and then, with a hush, The runes glowed, faint, golden, like candlelight within deep halls. From the heart of the mountain came a low sigh, as if the earth itself were breathing in. A narrow path emerged, not one carved by tools, but gently revealed, as if waiting all these years for someone to remember the way. No doors slammed, no lights flashed. It was not a show of magic, but a moment of still, ancient recognition. Inside the revealed passage, the air changed. It was not damp or cold, but strangely warm. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, not with flame, but with the soft blue light of memory. Along the walls, murals came into view, drawn in styles long lost to modern memory. There were dwarves in golden halls, kings of forgotten kingdoms, and maps that looked eerily familiar. At the very heart of this quiet corridor, the Hobbit found a pedestal carved of deep stone and shaped like a mountain. Upon it lay a small silver box, unadorned but timeless. He hesitated and then opened it. Inside lay not gold nor jewels, but a second map, delicate and ancient. Yet unlike the first, this one was alive. It shimmered faintly, a starlight-like glow upon its surface. The lands it revealed weren't entirely physical, but spiritual. It was a map of memory, of legacy, of the kingdoms that once were and may be again, should anyone choose to remember them. It was then the realization bloomed gently in his heart. The lost kingdom had never been a place to conquer or reclaim. It had been a story forgotten, a thread of heritage slowly fading from the loom of the world. The treasure was the remembrance, the knowing, the honoring. He sat there for some time, unmoving, save for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The light from the map softly lit his round face, his eyes reflecting not ambition or pride, but peace. Eventually he rose, placing the map carefully back into the box. But he knew now it wasn't his to keep. It belonged to the world. It belonged to the memory of Middle-earth. On his journey back, the world seemed quieter, but not an empty, rather aware. The trees bowed just slightly in the breeze. The rivers hummed with gentle tones. Even the stars appeared closer. And as he neared the familiar hills of the Shire, his small heart full and his steps slow, he paused atop one last hill, looking back. The map had shown him the path to something far greater than gold or titles. It had reminded him, and all who would hear, that the past need not be forgotten, that in stories told gently by firelight, kingdoms lost may yet be found, not in stone, but in soul. Oh, and so our journey winds gently to its close. The stars now rest high above the peaceful Shire, their soft glow scattered across the velvet night like lanterns are hung in the heavens. The wind has quieted, and the land, too, seems to exhale, content with the tale that has just been whispered through its hills and hollows. Our brave little hobbit, whose heart once pulsed with quiet curiosity, has returned to his garden, to his books, and to his simple fire. But he is no longer the same. The soil beneath his toes feels richer, the sky above him wider, and the world, oh, the world, deeper than he ever imagined. For though his journey began with ink on paper and stories half remembered, It ended with truth. A truth not shouted, but softly offered. A truth wrapped not in grandeur, but in memory and meaning. The map, tucked away now in a quiet corner of his home, does not call for adventure anymore. It hums with contentment, its journey fulfilled, its mystery passed on to someone who truly listened, not just with their ears, but with their heart. And perhaps, dear one, as you rest here beside him in spirit, nestled in the stillness of your own mind, you feel it too, that gentle tug of wonder, that quiet reminder that magic lives in the smallest things, in a leaf trembling on the breeze, in an old tale retold, in the hush of twilight as the stars bloom above. Maybe, just maybe, you followed a map of your own tonight, not one drawn in ink and runes, but a path carved through dreams and memory, one that led you not to a mountain or a treasure, but to a place of calm, of warmth, of understanding. And so, now that the tale is told, let your eyes grow heavy. Let the quiet wrap around you like a soft blanket. Let the rhythm of your breath match the rhythm of the night. There is nothing more to seek, nothing more to do. Only rest, only peace. May your dreams be lit by starlight, and your heart wander gently through the green hills of Middle Earth, where the stories live on forever. Good night, sleepy fellows. Sleep well, and may you always remember, even the smallest of hearts can uncover the greatest of truths.